Good morning, Warsaw. Today is Tuesday, 29th August. It will be sunny in the morning and cloudy in the afternoon, with highs of 21 degrees Celsius or 69 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. Sunrise will be at 5:57 a.m. and sunset at 7:47 p.m. We are on the 29th day of the Warsaw Uprising, and clearly marked hospitals are being directly targeted by the German bombers. Other than the spreading terror, what else are the Germans up to on this day?
Again, as always, Philippe, you're bang on the button. Yes, there are bombs being hit, but I just want to touch on first on what's happening in the Old Town. And I know I sound really repetitive, and I'm really sorry, but we will stop talking about the Old Town in the next couple of days. But I just want to remind you all that every 15 minutes, bombs are being dropped onto the Old Town. Every 15 minutes there's an air raid. Every 15 minutes you have to go and hide or take cover. Houses are being destroyed. Hospitals are being destroyed. Churches, every single building is being destroyed. The Old Town looks like a bunch of rubble. It looks absolutely horrible and terrifying. And just to remind you all that Antoni Kruszczel approved the plans to leave to the Old Town, and he decides on this day that it's going to take place on the night of the 30th to the 31st. So we will touch on that more tomorrow on what's going to be happening with the evacuation of the Old Town. Otherwise, what else is happening? So the Sadyba district, which is in the south, it is starting to repel the enemy attack. That is because this district is now heavily under attack. You have to remember, once the Old Town falls, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit more further into the podcast, we're only just about halfway through, is that once a certain district falls, all the enemy priority moves on to the next district and moves on to the next district. After this, it will be Powiśle, Sadyba, and all those other areas. So we'll get to it, I promise. Coming back to this Elizabethan hospital and the bombing of it, right on the top of the building was a clearly marked Red Cross. So anybody bombing from the air would clearly see that this is a hospital. This is oddly enough the same thing that the Germans did on the 1st September of 1939 when they invaded Poland and decided to bomb the sleepy little town of Wieluń. There was a clearly marked Red Cross on a hospital that had a bunch of pregnant women inside it, and they bombed it. They directly bombed it. So this is just a repeat of German terror, showing that nobody is safe. Even if you're in a hospital, you're not safe. You're all going to pay the price. Anyway, so it becomes a target of enemy bombers, and the evacuation process is led by a colonel who's the commander of the sanitary unit service. What's very interesting is I've even got a quote for you guys from Jan Lipinski, who was a gunner in the Home Army in the Bashta Regiment, and he'll explain to you what the whole evacuation process looked like.
It was one of the most difficult actions I experienced during the uprising, because we had to first jump on a stretcher into this boiling area, where bullets were almost constantly exploding everywhere, and the evacuation groups were shot at by the planes with onboard weapons. The assault on the Old Town is underway. The Germans take over the area of Ulica Wojtowska, Zakrętymska and Przyrynek. In the occupied areas, they murder some of the elderly and disabled people from Saint Stanisław and from the city shelter. The population is being brutally expelled from the Old Town, and there are numerous rapes and murders. Powiśle and Śródmieście are the target of heavy bombing. Heavy fighting is taking place on the streets.
Just unbelievable bravery from this man. But moving on, we touched on this quite a while back, and that is to do with the official recognition of the Home Army as an integral part of the Allied Armed Forces. Claire, tell us a little bit more about that. Where are we with this?
That's right. I mean, we talked about it. This was something that actually happened on the 21st of August, and we mentioned it then, but it's now that this becomes known. So it takes a while for this sort of change in policy to get press attention and public attention. So today it hits the newspapers that the Home Army has been recognised by both the British and by the Americans as an integral part of the Allied Armed Forces. And this is hugely important on a number of fronts. I mean, just start off, it's very interesting that the two declarations that appear on the same day are very, very similarly worded. So this is something that Britain and America managed to work on together. They have not always been completely in alignment when it's come to trying to persuade Stalin to enable the aircraft coming over to deliver supplies to land or refuel in Russian-held territory. But this is something that they can agree on and have clearly worked on together. And it is something that also has major critical impact on the Polish forces on the ground. What it means is that the Home Army soldiers must be treated in accordance with the laws of war. By that I mean they have combatant rights. And if they are captured, if they're taken, they cannot, under the Geneva Convention, they must be treated as prisoners of war, which means they shouldn't be being sent to labour camps. They should be sent to prisoner of war camps that can be inspected by the Red Cross and so on. So the way that this is communicated is important as well. It's up in a number of the press, both in Polish press, but also internationally. And it says, one of the articles says, the Polish Home Army, now fighting in the streets of Warsaw as a combat force, have warned Germany again that she will be held responsible for reprisals against it. So no longer can the fighting forces be considered as bandits or whatever. The fact that they have got their armbands, their white and red armbands, that counts as a uniform. These are military forces with military rights. But I must say there is one caveat that isn't mentioned in the press stories this day, and that is that women who are serving in the Home Army aren't given these rights. They are seen as a male fighting force, even though the women, of course, have taken the same oath. They are in exactly the same dangers, and by and large, they are doing the same service. There are less women in the front line holding weapons. There aren't enough weapons for everybody, but you also have male doctors who are considered soldiers, whereas the female doctors are not. So it is basically a gendered policy. And this is something that Zoe, who is now serving in provisioning during the uprising, has done a lot of work on. When she was sent, she was the only woman to be sent as an emissary of the commander-in-chief of the Polish Home Army. At that time, that was Stefan Rowecki. He is now dead and he's been replaced. But he had sent her with several missions to Britain to take very important microfilm with military intelligence, to improve the international courier routes. But what's relevant here is that she was sent to get women to have legal military recognition. She is still pushing for that. She's written the draft decree, but it hasn't yet been put into law. It hasn't been signed off by the current commander of the Home Army, which is Paul Komorowski. So a very important development, and one that will save many lives when people are taken as prisoners of war. It sounds pretty theoretical, but actually it will have huge life and death consequences. It sounds ridiculous that changing the legal status of the Home Army is going to have any impact. As we have repeatedly said, the Germans are being incredibly brutal here. They're not respecting combatant rights on the ground. And as far as the Soviets are concerned, they haven't actually signed or ratified the Geneva Convention. So they are staying completely silent on this. It's not something they're recognising in any case. But it does have impact, especially as the Warsaw Uprising moves towards its conclusion, when larger numbers of prisoners of war are being taken. But at the moment, what are the Germans doing? Roger, are they taking prisoners of war? How does this impact on them?
Yeah, it's interesting on this. On this day, there's a report that goes out from Erich von der Bach-Zelewski, who's the SS chief in Warsaw, to the commander of the Ninth Army, and in it he does give some details of some of the minor advances that they're making, but he also gives and incidentally, I mean, asks, as he always does, for more reinforcements. But tellingly, I think he asks for reinforcements of units that are experienced in urban warfare. So he doesn't want just, any old sort of scratch unit thrown into the fray, which I think is tribute to the dogged resistance that the Poles were putting up. But what's most interesting, I suppose, from a sort of historical perspective, is that he gives a breakdown of German losses for August. So up until the 28th of August, from the 1st to the 28th of August, which he numbers as over nearly 4,000, so 3,861 soldiers, including 91 officers killed. Which, if you do the maths, which I have, is about 150 a day. Now that is a considerable loss, but it pales almost into insignificance when you compare it to Polish losses in the same period. And when you bear in mind, as we said earlier on in the month, when you're talking about the massacres at Wola and Ochota, where, tens of thousands are killed, civilians are killed by the Germans out of hand, then you can see now that disparity then becomes absolutely astonishing. That the Germans in the same period lose, 4,000 soldiers, let's say. In terms of the civilian death toll in Warsaw, we're talking tens of thousands up to this point. So that's quite a telling statistic, and it shows you, it rather demonstrates that, for much of that early phase, the Germans are literally shooting unarmed civilians who are unable to fight back. So it's quite a telling statistic.
Thank you so much for listening to Day 29. We will see you all on Day 30. And again, remember, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple. Head over and give us a 5-star rating. It will help us get to more people. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.